Presnell, and today I have the opportunity to serve as the chair of the committee. And we will go ahead and take roll. Madam Secretary, you want to call the roll?
Treasurer David Lillard.
Here. On his behalf, Ashley Neighbors.
Comptroller Justin Wilson.
Vanessa, his designee.
Dr. Claude Presnell.
Here.
Commissioner Stuart McWhorter.
Greg Turner for Commissioner McWhorter.
Commissioner Penny Schwinn. Chancellor Tidings. Mr. Randy Boyd.
Linda Martin for Randy Boyd.
Mr. Cyrus Vandehus.
I'm here.
Ms. Tiffany Summers.
Here.
Ms. Carrie McInnes.
Here.
Mr. Tom Hughes.
Here.
Mr. John Smarley. Sorry.
Morelli, yes, here on phone.
Ms. Sharon Hayes.
Here by phone.
Mr. Charles Lane. And Ms. Sabrina Washington.
Present by phone.
Mr. Chairman, you do have a quorum, sir.
All right, we do have a quorum, but the quorum is not physically present, and so I'm going to call on Pete Abernathy for explanation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the board. As you probably can tell, we have not been able to establish a quorum here physically here in the boardroom. So as such, Tennessee Code Annotated 844-108 requires that the board make a determination that a necessity exists in order for a quorum of members to participate by electronic or other means. In this case, telephonic participation. A necessity is defined as a situation that where matters need to be considered by the governing board and that timely action be taken such that physical presence by the quorum is not practical within the period of time requiring the action, and that participation by a quorum of the members by electronic or other means is necessary. So in this case, we would say that first, pursuant to TSAC bylaws, the committee is required to meet at least twice a year. And in this case, the second point, the Board of Directors requested last fall that a meeting take place in early 2019 to determine the expenditure limits for the TSAA program for the 2019-2020 academic year. And due to the timing of the new legislative session and new administration, available times for a quorum to meet were limited. And then third, the resulting scheduling conflicts for the members of the board made it impractical to have a physical quorum present today.
All right, so based on Mr. Abernathy's discussion, the chairman's going to make a motion so that we can get it properly before us for discussion. So I move that based on the summary provided by Mr. Abernathy, a necessity exists for members to participate by telephone, and that the adoption of this motion and Mr. Abernathy's recitation of the facts and circumstances on which the determination of necessity is based be included in the minutes of this meeting. And I would entertain a second.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any comments or discussion about the motion of necessity so that we can hold the meeting and have a quorum based both on physical presence and by telephonic presence? All right, hearing none. Madam Secretary, would you take the roll?
Ms. Ashley Neighbors.
Aye.
Ms. Christina Podesta.
Aye.
Dr. Claude Presnell.
Aye.
Mr. Greg Turner.
Aye.
Linda Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Cyrus Vandehus.
Aye.
Ms. Tiffany Summers.
Aye.
Ms. Carrie McInnes.
Aye.
Mr. Tom Hughes.
Aye.
Mr. John Smarley.
Aye.
Ms. Sharon Hayes.
Aye.
Ms. Sabrina Washington.
Aye.
Okay, so the motion passes. The agenda was forwarded to you ahead of time. It is a very brief agenda, but we do need to have a motion to adopt the agenda. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion, Mr. Chairman, we adopt the agenda as it's been presented.
Second?
A second.
All right. Madam Secretary, take the roll.
Miss Ashley Neighbors. Miss Christina Podesta.
Aye.
Dr. Claude Presnell.
Aye.
Mr. Greg Turner.
Aye.
Dr. Linda Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Cyrus Vantendust.
Aye.
Miss Tiffany Summers. Miss Carrie McGinnis.
Aye.
Mr. Tom Hughes.
Aye.
Mr. John Smarelli.
Aye.
Miss Sharon Hayes.
Aye.
Miss Sabrina Washington.
Aye.
All right, very good. And so we've adopted the agenda. The next is the chairman's report. It will be brief. I have no report. Then we have the executive director's report. And so I'll call on Mike Kraus for the executive director's report.
I will also be brief, though you have set a new bar for brevity. A few things. First, we are eagerly awaiting the governor's office response on a TSAC designee. Given the timing of the meeting, I think it was really quick for them to turn that around. I suspect at the next TSAC meeting, we will have the governor's office designee. Second, for those of you that are here physically and those who are not here, we will email this to you. We have a summary before you of the governor's proposed budget, which we heard last Monday night. The point that around TSAC that I think is most important to focus in on first, we submitted to the governor for his consideration, and he accepted a proposed $12 million improvement to TSAA, which would take the fund to $116 million. For those of you that have been with the board for any length of time know, we were talking about a $50 million TSAA fund not too long ago. So this is exceptional. Obviously, the budget now will be considered by the General Assembly, but we applaud and thank the governor for including that in his recommendation. Secondary to that, on the TSAC front, we believe there will be a significant component of the governor's GIVE Act, which is the governor's investment in vocational education that TSAC will need to work through and work on, and that's relative, as proposed, the GIVE Act would expand the number of dual enrollment courses in a high-need field from the current funding level of 2 fully funded to 4 fully funded. Again, that is a legislative proposal that will now be considered by the General Assembly, but if we find ourselves implementing, that will be something, of course, we'll keep the board up to date on, and our staff are already working on how the mechanics of implementation would work if approved. Finally, I would just say you'll hear in a moment, and the main reason we're here today is to talk about our TSAA funding levels, but I just want to thank our staff. We had a meeting last spring where I think we had a great challenge, which was more Tennesseans used TSAA than we had projected, and so we're glad that more Tennesseans were able to use it. At the same time, our first duty is a fiduciary one to TSAC and to the TSAA fund, and at that time, we had hoped to come back at exactly this time and be able to report to you that our reserves were at least 10% of cash on hand, and we are in that posture. In fact, we probably need to think through, as Pete will walk you through in a moment, how to get some more money out to students because we've met our reserve requirement now moving forward. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd conclude, but again, those on the phone will email you the summary of the governor's proposed budget after the meeting.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Any questions or comments for Mike?
Comment that I think the TSAC is doing a fabulous job, and we have come a long way in having sufficient reserves. That was a concern of this board. And so the staff listened to that concern and responded positively to it and enacted. So thank you.
Very good. And the only other comment I might make is in reference to the governor's increase. It will be one of the largest increases that we will net into that program. And so I am exceptionally pleased that the governor's following really the track record of Governor Haslam, but in a very robust manner. So really excited about that. And I'm hoping the day will come soon where we'll have that program fully funded and meet the need of all highly needy Tennesseans. So very good. Any other comments or questions for Mike? All right, well, let's get into the decision item. So the decision item is on your agenda is the 2019-2020 academic year TSAA overcommitment. I'm going to call on Tim Phelps to brief us on this commitment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Director Kraus, members of the board. So I'll just go over some information about the TSA program before I make my recommendation. As you all are probably aware, the prior year expenditures exceeded about $100 million, the $100 million appropriation by about $5 million. We had about 62,000 recipients for the 17-18 academic year, and that necessitated the use of the student loan program and the TSA reserves. We did end the FY18 year with a reserve balance of about $800,000. Current year expenditures, we're estimating about $84.5 million, and we'll have about 50,000 recipients. What that will do is place about $16.5 million in the TSAA reserve, and that would increase the total balance of the reserve to about $17.3 million at the end of the year. And obviously, as we just mentioned, we intentionally underspent this year to increase the reserve to a minimum of about 10% of the total appropriations, and those are conversations that we've had at prior board meetings. We did, and TSAC traditionally we've came to the board with a over commitment ratio that we've used, and most years that's been very successful. Obviously, we had the anomaly for the 17-18 academic year, but this past year we did use a methodology that was that we worked with TSAC in conjunction with, where we looked at take-up rates for students based on demographic information, their application date, factors like that. And even using that, we still intentionally underspent the award. So historically, the board has approved that over award percentage that we've used around 153% for the last 5 or 6 years. But given the variance we've had in the last couple years, that percentage is really somewhat arbitrary. So we are coming to the board with a 3-part recommendation. The first recommendation is for TSAC to maintain a target reserve balance of 10% of our total state appropriation. We're also asking the board to give staff the authority to fully expend the annual appropriation. And we would do this like we've traditionally done, identifying expenditure levels on a monthly basis and then discontinuing awards based on a prior year expenditure level as well, and looking at where we stand essentially at the end of each month. And then finally, we would do that by making spring awards if the total expenditures in the fall semester are below what it looks like we'll spend as far as our total appropriation. Really, our justification for this recommendation, and we've talked about this as well, but the changing landscape of the financial aid, really due to Promise, due to Reconnect. Obviously, we mentioned at one of the prior board meetings, the Reconnect, we initially had an expenditure estimate of about $9 million for the current year, and right now we're in the $22 to $23 million range. So, but we would doing that makes it a hard target to hit every year. But the recommendation would give staff the necessary flexibility to make awards on a regular basis rather than just setting a single over award percentage at the beginning of the year. And we would also keep the board informed as we traditionally do on a regular basis regarding expenditures, recipients, and happy to answer any questions.
Okay, let me, this is Claude for those of you on the phone. So help me out, Tim. I heard 2 things there. I saw 10%, that there would be a 10% reserve of the appropriated funds, and that you would have the authority to expend 100% of those appropriated funds each year, provided that the reserve is at that target amount. What was the third?
Really, the third was just to make spring awards, and that can be part of the
Is that really necessary if we give you authority to?
It doesn't have to be. I just simply threw that out there. It's something we traditionally don't do, but if we feel.
If we had the board assembled, we wanted to make sure you were aware. Again,
Right.
first priority, health of the reserve. But then if we find it doesn't do any student any good for us to hold on to money we don't need. And so there's no doubt we'd like to formalize the discretion. And this will be something I think Leah will do operationally. If we find ourselves over 10% in January or February, if there's a way for us to get the money out on the street, as we say, that the board is aware we would do that. And I think it'd be a net positive for students.
So let me go ahead and I'll go ahead and make a motion from the chair and get it seconded, and then we can open it up for more discussion. I just wanted clarification. And actually, I think what I'm going to do is really I'm going to roll two recommendations into one motion and probably dispense with the third one, only because if we're giving you the authority to spend 100% of the appropriated funds, you will administratively figure out a way to do that that's appropriate. And, so I'm going to go ahead without objection and make a motion that the TSAC staff maintain a 10% reserve of the appropriated funds of the TSAA, and that they have the authority to expend 100% of the appropriated funds each year. So that would be the motion. Again, maintain a 10% reserve and also spend 100% of the funds appropriated each year. Do I have a second?
Second. Linda Martin.
Thank you, Linda. So now let's open it up for discussion. And if I might, just a little bit of history on this issue, since I think I've been on the board longer than just about anybody. I'm over 20 years. Anyway, this particular issue used to not even be discussed by the board, and it was just understood that the appropriated amount would be spent, and we would hope that 100% of it would be spent. Then, as executive directors changed, the decision about this particular item kept being increased to the level of attention of the board, which is not inappropriate. It just was. So it was a part of the executive committee discussion for a good number of years, but it was a discussion item. And then it got turned into a voting item. And so now that's kind of got us to where we are here today. So I want to, in favor of this motion, say I think this is the appropriate place for us as a board to be, that we would basically approve these parameters, approve the expenditure of the appropriated funds, approve that level of the reserve, but let the staff administrate that. And instead of us trying to get into the administration of over award percentages, under award, and adjusting those each year. So I think that this motion puts the board in a better position than it was in before. I might also suggest that the 10% reserve is a target that the staff needs to maintain, that again, keeping the board informed, but if it so happened that the reserve got spent down slightly because of the inaction, the administration of those funds to students, it's just understood that the next year it gets back up to that 10%. But and we will constantly be informed about that, but that we see it more as a target than we see it as a hard line. But Mike?
I appreciate that latitude, if only because, one, we'll be watching our expenditure levels very closely, so we'll always know. But if we found ourselves in a position where our options were decreasing awards or going into the reserve by a few $100,000, we would want to do the latter. That's what that reserve is for. And so I appreciate, however that motion is amended, that the 10% is a target, and that you all can be assured we take that really seriously. It's pretty much all we've been talking about for 12 months, and we'll continue to. But what I wouldn't want to do is we end up in a great position, but we have to reconvene the board in order to spend a small amount of the reserve, which at this point, given the forecasting that's going on, I believe that's where the posture we would always be in. Last year, we've learned a couple things. One, it was a huge anomaly. And we have done a lot of forensics on what happened. And the answer is nothing happened that hasn't happened every other year. I think we had a Tennessee Reconnect campaign going on that probably drove it. But that notion that the reserve and that cash on hand is so befitting a program that's now 116 million versus when it was 50, I think we've got kind of down, at the cellular level now as a staff. But I do think some latitude's appropriate. And so I appreciate you putting that there so we don't have to reconvene you to keep students whole in a given scenario.
And this is Ms. McInnes. I don't think, though, your motion gave that latitude, did it? The way you stated
No,
it?
I think that probably we would, and I want to talk about a potential amendment to it, and none of this
Yeah.
is written down, but, so let's put that on the table. As a matter of fact, let me attempt an amendment, to that. And one, again, you still would have the 10%. The 10% is the target, but I would amend it to say that we treat the 10% as a target, and that if the reserve would hit a 5% level, the board must be reconvened for authority.
Well, I'd like to entertain that we say 7% as opposed to 5%.
Okay.
Only because, and this is Ms. McInnes for those that are on the phone, because if you go down to 5 from 10, that's half. And then my concern is that we run into a situation where we were last year.
Okay.
And so I think it would be more conservative approach to say 7 or 7.5, pick the number, but as opposed to slicing it down to 5%.
Okay. Would you like to put that in the form of a motion?
Are you withdrawing your amendment?
Well, I'll withdraw.
Okay. So this is Ms. McInnes. I would like to propose that the amendment be 7% of the reserve.
So the
Reconvene.
The board would
The board would-
reconvene if it was required that the reserve was dropping to 7%. If it needed to go down from the target of 10 to 7%, that would require a board approval to do so. So the target is 10, but if it needs to drop below target, then the board would need to be reconvened to approve it to go down if it starts to drop down to 7%. Am I saying that right?
Okay, I'll second that, and now that's open for discussion, the amendment. So any comments on the amendment? Make sure everybody understands that.
The board, excuse me, the board would have to reconvene if it dropped to 7%. Is that correct?
That is correct, and permission, the board would reconvene and the staff would need to get board approval to do any expenditure below that 7% level.
Does the staff have any thoughts on that?
Peter?
Well, no, I think the intent is good. The reality is, we may not know until the end of the fiscal year or end of the academic year where we exactly fall. So based on when we measure, we may see that we're at 8% or 7.5%, and then the next week or month, all of a sudden we see that we're at 7% or a little below.
But I think if you're getting close to that point, you'll know that you're getting close, and then that's where the board would be asked to reconvene.
Yeah,
You're
I would say
monitoring it continuously.
Yeah,
We are, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So 7% hits your radar. It looks like we're at 7.
Okay.
Then we need to
Then we call it.
then call the board together and
Okay.
talk with us.
That's good.
Yes.
Other comments or suggestions on the amendment? Okay, we'll be voting on the amendment and we'll take a roll call on the amendment. The amendment again is that the 10% is a target percentage and that if the reserve amount hits 7% or below, that the board would need to be reconvened at that 7% mark. So, Madam Secretary, take the roll that you're voting on the amendment.
Ms. Ashley Neighbors,
Aye.
Christina Podesta,
Aye.
Dr. Claude Presnell,
Aye.
Mr. Greg Turner,
Aye.
Dr. Linda Martin,
Aye.
Mr. Cyrus Vatendust,
Aye.
Ms. Tiffany Summers, Ms. Carrie McInnes,
Aye.
Mr. Tom Hughes,
Aye.
Mr. John Cimarelli,
Aye.
Ms. Sharon Hayes,
Aye.
Ms. Sabrina Washington.
Aye.
Okay, and the amendment passes. We're back on the motion. So the motion as amended is that the staff have the authority to expend 100% of the appropriated amount each year, and that there is a target reserve of 10%. But if that reserve gets to 7%, the board must be reconvened to be advised and take action any further on expenditures. So any further comments on the motion as amended? Okay, Madam Secretary, take the roll, please.
Miss Ashley Neighbors,
Aye.
Christina Podesta,
Aye.
Dr. Claude Presnell,
Aye.
Mr. Greg Turner,
Aye.
Dr. Linda Martin,
Aye.
Mr. Cyrus Battendust,
Aye.
Miss Tiffany Summers,
Aye.
Miss Carrie McInnes,
Aye.
Mr. Tom Hughes,
Aye.
Mr. John Cimarelli,
Aye.
Miss Sharon Hayes,
Aye.
Miss Sabrina Washington.
All right, and the motion passes. Is there any further business for the board?
I would ask our board council when we foresee we will need to reconvene as a board.
We usually have done that at the end of the legislative cycle, so probably April, May timeframe. Probably depends somewhat on the kind of legislation that ends up passing and bringing rules to the board. So it would just.
And I mean, they're looking at target early May for adjournment. So, I mean, it depends on who you talk to, for sure. Any other comments? Any other thing? Any for the good of the order?
Make a motion, we adjourn.
A second.
All right. Adjournment is enacted with everybody hanging up on the phone. So thank you all very much for taking your time to be here.
Thank you.
I'm glad I